Witness as faith and surfing collide in our new series that sheds light on the captivating journey of a vast community forged through faith and waves. Welcome to the origin of a legacy, the story of Christian surfers South Africa. From the rugged coastline of Cape Town to the sandy shores of Durban, a vision had been established and a legacy was born. Each episode invites you into the history and footsteps of those who forged the path of Christian surfers in South Africa. Fueled with a love for Jesus and sharing his good news with all through the medium of surf culture, join us as we dive into the testimonies that make up the origin of Christian surfers South Africa. Thrill over untold stories and immerse yourself in the experiences of the individuals that charged into the challenges set before them, pioneering the foundation of the community you and I have the privilege to be a part of.
Hello, welcome to another episode of Origin of a Legacy, where we talk about the history of Christian surfers in South Africa. My name is Andrew. I'm just going to be helping out with the interview, and today we're going to be chatting to Ian, who was also, if I'm correct, one of the founding members of Christian Surfers.
Yeah, sort of in the background there.
Sort of in the background. So Ian, I don't know, just start off just telling us about who you are, what's your connection to Christian surfers exactly, and yeah, just let us know a bit more about yourself.
Yeah. I grew up in Cape Town, sort of in the, not close to the beach. I was inland, a little suburb called Monte Vista. And I discovered surfing when I was about, must have been about 12, 13, just down at the local beaches here in Blouberg. And I just fell in love with it. And it's from those early days, just started, those are the days of Tom Curran and Mark Occhilupo in the mid-80s. Fell in love with surfing and the whole surfing culture, and never really put two and two together with that and Christianity. I was brought up in a sort of traditional Christian home, so I always knew God, and I always knew about him and had a relationship with him. And then the surfing thing came along, and I was just sort of just swallowed up by that. And then people came across my life that kind of put Christianity and surfing together, because the whole surfing culture was that whole sort of surf all day, rage all night. Those were the heroes, and that's what you saw in the magazines and the movies. So it was like this diverse cultures, like the Christian culture was what I knew from church and how I was brought up, and then it was the surfing culture, which was like just free and different and out there, and then only when I actually bumped into guys like Roy back in the day, which also was an amazing story how I met him, and guys like Mervyn Lee, I met through church, and being this like wide-eyed grom that like didn't really know much, and being dragged out at crazy surf spots with Mervyn. So that's kind of where the call it Christian surfers connection came in, because it didn't exist before then. You know, that you had church and you had surfing, which was like so separated in a way. Yeah. And then so that would have been like the mid to late 80s, met Mervyn Lee, and he took me on a couple of surf trips, and my brother and friends of ours, and dragged us out at Rocklands on like crazy days that we had no place being there, and just getting absolutely obliterated, and a whole lot of guys like that. You know, there was like guys like Mervyn Lee, another guy called Les Woods. It took us, like, you know, in the days before surf trip, well, there were always surf trips, but, you know, sleeping on Scarborough Beach when there was like nothing. We would go on a Friday afternoon, go surf Scarborough, and literally sleep on the beach where that car park is now. We would sleep there, and or places.
And then surf first thing in the morning.
First thing in the morning, Scarborough, like that beach break or the little point break, and then go to dunes as the southeaster came up, and so there were like always those older guys that actually were Christians and that were surfers, and they just lived that lifestyle. I remember going up the West Coast you know, places that now have got houses. We would just, Fontain's a good example, like we would sleep on the beach. Our parents would drop us off on weekends on a Friday, sleep on the beach at Scarp Island. There were no houses. And guys like Les and Mervyn were those oaks that sort of showed us the coastline and showed us surfing. But they were older, you know, they had families already. So although they were great sort of mentors in that sense, they weren't our peers and were sort of already out of that surf all day, rage all night stage of their lives. And it was only then when I met Roy and they would have been sort of early varsity days, where I met Roy, that I sort of really got an understanding of this Christian surfers thing, that it wasn't just older guys that had families, it was young crazy oaks as well, and all over the world.
I've come to realize for myself, I wasn't a surfer when I first joined Christian Surfers Now. I came to join it because of the church I'm in and the ministry there. I've come to realize that surfers really love dragging you out of your comfort zone. So you talk about Merv taking you to spots that were, or your brother taking you to Rocklands. It sounds par for the course. So it's good to hear that spirit within surfers that has always existed of just like taking friends out of the comfort zone is still kind of there. So I can imagine Roy probably did a lot of that with you as well. So I think like the idea, or I want to know kind of how you came into Christian Surfers. I'm assuming it's part of your story with Roy.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'd love to know how you kind of came into Christian Surfers.
So, Mervyn used to take us surfing a lot. Mervyn Lee, he was older than us, and used to take us to all these crazy spots. And one of those was Rocklands, which is a spot in Sea Point. And I paddled out there the one day, and I think there was only one other guy out. And I suppose like you are when you're young, you've always got a bit of an attitude, and that was like, it's the stupid localism thing, you know, is that's like your spot now. Mervyn used to take us there. We'd been going there for years, and then there's this other oak out there, and you're like, oh, okay, who's this guy? So it was just the two of us sitting out there, and as weird as surfing is, you like don't really talk to oaks. It's like two of you sitting out in the beautiful ocean, sun setting, and you like don't talk to each other, you know. But we're sitting out at Rocklands, and it's like a small little takeoff zone. You like literally sit as close as we are together. And yeah, he'll tell you the story from his side, but I was there like not really wanting to talk to this strange oak that's sitting at my spot, you know. But then he then said to me, do you know Jesus? And I was like, geez, yeah, I do actually, yeah. And like, yeah, I'm a Christian, and we got talking, you know, and that broke the ice, and I suppose therein lies a lesson just in sort of leave your attitude at the beach and always be willing to just take an interest in somebody that's in the water. And we've all grown up since then, so our attitudes have changed. But that was the start. And we then, and then he told me in the water, we got chatting, and he had said, I've moved down here from Durban and starting this thing called, and at that stage it was Sun Surf, like SON Surf. And we're having a contest, and you must pull in. And so, yeah, he then, and my brothers also surfed. I've got younger brothers. So we were like, okay, well, let's go along to this contest that they're going to host. And yeah, I was always the sort of responsible older kid, and Roy's exactly, well, he's the oldest, but he's not the responsible one. So, yeah, he fully dragged me out of my comfort zone. Mervyn had dragged us out of our comfort zone in terms of surf spots, but Roy dragged me out of my comfort zone just in terms of, I think just the way he served God was different. Like, I'm that responsible oldest kid kind of thing, do everything by the book, and he just blew that away. You know, it was like you can actually be crazy and serve and love Jesus at the same time, and play in a like rock band so yeah, that I think was like a game changer for me and for my brothers and I, and going to that first contest, and then hanging out with the Oaks afterwards, and then And then then it was so small. There was like probably 10 oaks at that contest, and they all came from Cape Town Baptist, probably. And then it kind of just grew from there. So that's how I got involved.
At the time, because if I'm correct, so we just up the road from Big Bay, and at the time you guys were making use of the Big Bay lifeguard.
So that came later.
Or was it later?
Yeah, so Roy was. He'd kind of come down to Cape Town from Durban, and he's got a whole. I'm sure he'll cover his whole story. But he was staying in this called the Greenhouse in Sea Point, just up High Level Road, and it's still there and it's still green. And so it was all like a little Sea Point startup. It was like we would surf those spots, and just he had this little Mazda 323 that he drove down from Durban, and we subsequently drove up and down to Durban a few times, and it broke down a few times and stranded along.
Surfboards on top.
So you couldn't fit surfboards inside. It was so small, and so it all started there, and so from there we would just mission, and we'd go surf like down in the reserve and Komiki and the West Coast and the East Coast. I mean, we would drive on a. So I remember going to J Bay once on a Friday afternoon in a little Lazelle Vilsnach had this little, I can't even remember the size, I think it had like a 1.1 litre engine, like this small little car, and we just missioned, like 4 of us, Friday afternoon, off to J Bay, and arrived back for work on the Monday morning, and so it was just that time in your life where you just got a lot of time and not a lot of money, but you just make it work, and so it started out there, and then later through a guy called Sean McCormick, who now lives in the UK. He was working at the Surfrider Cafe here at Big Bay, which at those days Big Bay was like a gravel car park, and it had a little cafe and a little life-saving tower, and that was it, and a few braai spots, and we literally used to sleep on the beach here at Big Bay, and Sean got us involved with the Bloberg Life Saving Club, and they then said we can use their facility on a Monday night, and that's our. That was, I suppose, was where Christian surfers in Cape Town really got a little bit more established. In that every single Monday night we would pick up a whole lot of the groms here in the local area and go for a surf, and then have some coffee and have like a sort of Christian surfers service every Monday night, like clockwork. It would just, and we did it for years and years, and so that's how the whole Big Bay thing started, eh?
Yeah. So you say you meet Roy in the water at Rocklands. He starts talking to you about Jesus, and then you guys get chatting about Christian surfers. So how did you find yourself really kind of digging into becoming part of the movement, like and actually helping to get this thing going?
Yeah. Well, geez, there were just so few of us. I mean, it was like, definitely wasn't a movement. It was like literally a few guys surfing together every now and then and hooking up. And so, I mean, there was the Sea Point crew, which was like Roy and Dimitri and Nathan Ganetsky, Dean Payne, Terran Williams, those guys, and me and my brothers. And so you kind of just got involved. It was the only guy. Those were the guys. It was your friends. You were hanging out with your friends, and you were inviting other friends to come with you surfing. And back then, if you got a lift to the beach or a lift up the West Coast or something, you went. So there were so many guys that would just come along for the ride, and whether they were believers or not, it didn't matter. It was just you were hanging out, and I suppose we would use the contests as sort of a tool. So that's kind of where I got involved. Roy was not a numbers guy, so somebody had to work out how many heats you could run in a day, and how many hours of daylight you got, and friggin' how many repocharge heats, and so I think that's just how we got involved. It was like you're all friends doing this thing together, and you just start small, and it just built up from a little contest with a few heat sheets and everyone judging to like a lot bigger contests, run a little bit more professionally with decent sponsorship, and indemnity forms and all that kind of thing that you never think of in the early days. So I got involved with it from that point of view. And those days that was probably, I was still at varsity studying, and I had a bursary to work for the company that that had paid for my studies. So I was locked into that. So I had to go from that carefree varsity life of like mountains of holiday to suddenly like 10 days leave a year or something crazy. But I was still involved, but sort of torn between this, like, I'd love to do this thing full time, but I've got this bursary and I got to work in the sort of engineering field, and then sort of, I thought miraculously at the time, a year and a half into my working the bursary back, the company that I was working for said I didn't have to work for them anymore. The times were tough. It was like that phase in the economic cycle where their building industry was sort of down and out, and my boss at the time said, "Listen, you're free to go," and I was like, "Wow, this is like my answer to prayer. I'm like going to be a full-time youth pastor. I'm going to join Roy," and so that was like mid-95, like early 95. I jumped on a plane. I went to Reunion Island for a couple of weeks with a guy that I met he was down here from New Zealand. We just surfed, and then we stayed in Durban for a while. We stayed in J-Bay for a while. And so I was a free agent. And that's when I think Dimitri was full-time already. Roy was full-time already. So I didn't have a job, and I just joined them, and I used to go to that little office there in Cape Town Baptist, and we would pretty much do this thing. We would run contests in East London, Cape Town, wherever, and that's what I thought I was going to do, Christian Surfers.
So you kind of became like the numbers guy, or
Dimitri was always the strategist and the numbers guy. I was kind of along for the ride. I was
jack of all trades.
Jack of all trades. I'm just a follower. So Roy was the visionary. Dimitri just brought his whole crazy. Dimitri's always got these weird ways of looking at things and out there, and I just sort of plugged in the gaps and helped where I could, and those was great times. Like staying all over up and down the coast, and the whole thing grew from that, and you had the guys up in PE, Craig Cuff and them had started something, and so it sort of all, I'm sure Roy told you about the sort of vision he had of this little flame starting in Cape Town and then spreading up the coast, and so to be a part of that was amazing for that season, and then God called me back into the workplace, which is like a whole another story, but and then staying involved, and for me the amazing thing is, and just reflecting back on it as we've been talking, and is just how, like, from little insignificant things and little meetings that you have with people in the water, whether it's Roy and Craig Cuff surfing against each other in a contest in East London, I think it was, or me meeting Mervyn, or me meeting Roy, all these, you think they're little insignificant things, or Roy and I meeting Pedro, who was the pastor at Edge Church. Like that in itself was just a game changer, because those early days, there's no counterculture, or whatever counterculture is nowadays, but there was none of that existed. There were no snowboarders for Christ, or friggin' skaters, or it was just us, like, surfing, and Pedro Erasmus, who headed up Edge Church at the time, was the first guy that I remember like connecting with us. I remember taking Roy to see him, and the church for Jesus Christ and the church is amazing, and just that in its simplest form is what changes lives. But religion and tradition and people's views on how things should be run has sometimes given the church a bit of a bad rep. But Pedro wasn't like that at all. he knew squat about surfing or the beach or but he met with us, and back in the day, nowadays you'd have a PowerPoint presentation, whatever. I don't know what we had then, but he was like, put away all your stuff. I don't even want to know about all of that and how much money you need. Or he said, and I'll never forget this. He said, tell me your dream. And no one had ever said that to us. And it was always their agenda versus our agenda, and so those little seemingly insignificant meetings of people, like whether it was me meeting Roy in the water or us meeting Pedro, or you just never know what the long-term effect is going to be and what the repercussions are. I mean, me meeting Roy introduced Roy to Pedro, it introduced Roy to Sharon. It's crazy how, and still we're best of friends, our kids surf together, our kids hang out together, and we've been snowboarding together, we've been on plenty surf trips together, and God is just so good from that point of view. And so meeting Pedro was a game changer, because suddenly we had sort of more backing. They had been backing before Cape Town Baptist, but I just remember that being a pivotal point. And Pedro and Edge Church backing Roy, and that, I think, gave it a lot of momentum and really started things in Cape Town in a more, call it, structured way.
I'm just thinking to put a quick pin in the CS story. While you've been sharing, I think something that there would be that is a struggle that many people face, that I think would be good to hear from somebody that's been through it, is often people struggle with the decision of what does it mean to honor God. And this is specifically in light of to go back to when you were working off the bursary time, but you wanted to do CS work. And I think often people sit there, and then you said, well, then later, then God called you back into going back to engineering. I think often people kind of, when it comes to honoring God, if ministry is an option, then we go in that direction. And you kind of said, no, but look, like part of that honoring God is He gave me the bursary to go study, and we worked that out. And in His time, He released you from that, which was beautiful. So I think, I don't know if you want to say something in sense of that, like what does it mean for you to kind of honor God, particularly when it comes to things like ministry, like,
Yeah, sure. It's something I'm actually quite passionate about, in that, there's we all serve God and we all love God, and where we planted, it's like prosper where you planted. And although I thought that was my dream, there's that, I think it's in Psalms or is it Proverbs, I can't remember, where it's like, commit yourself to God and He'll grant you the desires of your heart. And I think for me it was, I thought I knew what my desires were, and that it was going to be this full-time pastor story. And yet, I think God changes the desires of your heart. He sort of directs the rivers. I think Proverbs 21 talks about the God can direct the rivers of your heart. And so what I thought was where I needed to be or wanted to be, and I think that was traditionally how the church worked. You either, if you're a pastor or you're a youth pastor, then you're serving God. The other oaks are just there on a Sunday to support. But it's not. It's love God, love people wherever you are, whether you're an engineer, whether you're a student, whether you pastor, and I think people just need to see real people. They don't want to see the shiny, polished church that's perfect. It doesn't exist, and it's when we try and make people think that it exists is when we get it wrong. It's just be real and love God, love people, and He'll take care of the rest.
So to come back to kind of the CS journey, and it doesn't necessarily have to be something from the very, very early days, but you said you were involved for quite a while and you had those services and that kind of stuff. Is there any stuff for you that really struck you and you just saw God moving in those moments? Is there a story or two that you can kind of share?
I think for me, looking back, it's actually the small things, eh? The seeing now, like I say, those little interactions that you that never despise the small beginnings, like the people that are serving God now that were smoking dope in the dunes here with their girlfriends, and we would take them surfing, and now they're serving God. They've got families of their own. They've impacted other people's lives. So I think for me, the beauty of the Christian surfer story is that it's relational. That Brett was doing his thing in Australia at the same time that Craig Cuff had this little dream in PE, and Roy had it here, and all it takes is people to sort of run with it and have a dream. And God is a God of dreams, and Pedro was part of that. Subsequently, there's been so many other people, and so seeing those little interactions and seeing how faithful God is in the little things, and not that doesn't have to be like a huge rah. It's like individual lives that have been changed across the world, and I think so. Never, for me, I suppose, never despise the small beginnings, and never think that anything is insignificant. Talking to someone in the water, having a smile. Like, what kind of energy do you bring to the lineup? Are you the grumpy oak? Are you the guy that is miffed because it's getting crowded and it's not like it used to be? And that's not what it's about. It's about just surfing is we in nature, we in God's creation, and we're called to be the salt and the light. I mean, just how much salt water and sunlight. I mean, that's what we are.
Yeah.
And so that's what's been amazing for me, and the relationships that get built, and that's what it's about. It's about the people and finding something that you're passionate about, that you love doing. Do it with people, and that's where you being the salt and the light is what's amazing for me.
It is. I mean, it's a beautiful answer, because I think if you look at a lot of church history, and I mean, it's not all surprising, because it's not just church history. The actual beginnings of our faith with Jesus, it was the small interactions.
Yeah.
Sure, he fed the 5,000, and yes, there were amazing miracles that went with that. But it was the talking with Nicodemus in the garden at night. It was the one-on-one with the disciples. A lot of it was that, and when the disciples then went we went into Acts, and it was those one-on-one little conversations and small interactions, and if you look at the history of the church, also it is also just filled with massive things coming from small interactions, or like God lighting fires, like Australia, PE, Cape Town, like similar to that. The church history is just filled with stories of there were little fires lit everywhere, and that just led to a beautiful, massive change. And I think that's stunning. Personally, for you though, how has kind of CS impacted your life?
I think it offered me an alternative, when there weren't too many alternatives. Like it was, like I said earlier, surf culture was surf all day, rage all night, and those were the role models. The movies you watched, the magazines you read, it was all about that sort of crazy lifestyle, and surfing was different. It was, back then it wasn't, I mean, I might sound like the guys coming out of the 60s, but in the surfing was, it wasn't considered mainstream. It wasn't, there wasn't surf, you couldn't do it as a school sport. Yeah. It like just never happened like that. So for me, I think what Christian surfers represented, and meeting guys like Brett and Roy and Craig Cuff, it offered the alternative. It was like, you know what, you can still serve God, you can still do crazy things, but you don't have to get drunk every night and live this crazy lifestyle, which is destructive anyway, because you see it as you get older. You see that those guys that were doing that, it leads one way, and it's so I think it showed me the alternative. It showed me that there were guys that were passionate about their walk with God, and yet also were crazy enough to do stupid things, and that was the amazing thing for me, and it still is like that, you know. I think it still does offer that alternative, that thief comes to steal, rob, and destroy, but Jesus came to give us life, and life more abundantly. And I think that's what I saw in Christian Surfers, was the more abundant life. And you don't always realize it at the time, but as you get older, like we are now, me and Roy and the older guys like Brett, you see how those pathways, they do the Pilgrim's Progress. So you're either going down the right path or the wrong path, and at some point, it just, that gap widens, and thankfully there's still young guys coming, doing crazy things, and loving God and serving God, and so our role changes, but Jesus doesn't change, which is insane.
On that note of young guys still serving God and finding those spaces, as kind of a concluding question, have you got any advice just for young guys that are wanting to not necessarily get involved in CS, but guys that are actually wanting to get something going? Maybe they want to start a CS chapter, or because I do think for me, we often see in the church, young people aren't really given a space to lead or to do stuff, and it's kind of like, you know, one day when you are older, you can do it. And so do you have any advice for, you know, if there are Groms or early 20s guys who are keen to lead or do something within CS or about CS, any advice for them?
Look, I think it's quite easy actually, because surfing is like just such a relational thing, and so often kids, or they don't have transport, they don't have money, so it's a case of just build relationship. Like if you look at Jesus, how did Jesus lead? He said, I'm here, I'm doing this, follow me if you want. He never said, if you want to follow me, you got to do this. He was like, follow me, you decide whether this is a cool thing or not, and whether I'm real. And I think that would be my advice to anyone is, and it doesn't just mean, not just relating to youngsters like wanting to start up something, but for anyone, you know, it's a case of build relationship. Just take an interest in people, and just offer them a trip to the beach. Offer them take an interest, and the relationship will get built, and then it'll grow, and then people will, you know, they will notice, like Pedro noticed, and then they gathered around us and helped us. I think that would be my advice. Just do it. Just start small. Don't despise small beginnings, and just spend the petrol money and the lunch money, and buy someone a burger after a surf, or and take an interest in them. And at the same time, you're doing something you love. You're going to go find waves and live this amazing lifestyle that God has given us. Because I think that for me was one of the key things. Was it's God gives this to you to enjoy. It wasn't like surfing's a bad thing. It's a beautiful thing that we can use for the kingdom and to build into people's lives.
Well, Ian, thank you so very much for sharing your story with us. It's always encouraging, I think, to hear the stories from 20 years ago, 30 years ago, of how God worked then, and to see how He's still working now, and using the ministry that happened all those years ago to really feed into the ministry we still see happening today. So thank you very much for sharing your story. Thank you for joining us for the episode today, and we'll see you again for the next episode.